This is the Simply Home podcast, Ladies Who Build, a podcast for women by women. This is Ashley Wainscott
and Michelle Mullins. After spending the last 10 years revolutionizing the construction industry and raising the bar of the contracting world, we are inviting you on our journey as we continuously learn how to be extraordinary and thrive in this industry. Now come hang with us.
All right, welcome to Season 3, Episode 32 of Ladies Who Build. We are extremely excited to be talking to you about permits. It's one of our most favorite topics, and Michelle and I have quite the knowledge and expertise on permits, so we will be sharing with you today a few things. One of them being considerations for pulling permits. We want to go in depth talking about what we recommend to homeowners and clients when looking at pulling permits. And then we'll move into commercial versus residential permits and the different types of permits. And we will shift down into how to apply for permits. We'll talk through that and our steps that we take. And we'll hit a little bit on talking about permit expediters. And I realize they're not just here in Austin, Texas. So they're accessible throughout the nation. And lastly, we'll go through the whole inspection process and talk through everything that brings to the table. You ready, Michelle?
There's a lot.
All right, here we go. All right, so we're going to go into considerations for pulling permits.
So, okay, some of the things to consider if you don't understand or on the fence about pulling permits. So basically, like in a very high level nutshell, is when you pull permits with the city that you're in, you are basically saying that you're opening up the project for inspection. You are going to make sure that everything's done up to city code and state code. And the city is going to essentially kind of guide your GC, your builder, along to make sure that they're like following the code and calling out anything that needs to be fixed or done again. And what's nice about having a permitted project is that if you ever go to sell your home, you can tell your buyers that, yes, we did this addition and it's permitted, so it's all good to go, right? Kind of gives the buyer a little bit more ease knowing that it was done up to city code. With that, if you don't know anything about the Austin city code process or inspection process, it is notorious. How do I put this nicely? It's notorious for being one of a kind. There is no other city like the city of Austin when it comes to permits and inspections. And even like large cities that we are around, like Dallas and Houston, have a way simpler process than we do. So long story short, our process in the city of Austin is painfully slow. I think they're actually doing a lot to work on it. I have seen some improvements, and I think they're trying to build in some new technology with it, but it is notoriously been slow and people dragging their feet to get it across the finish line.
Yeah, you should plan for it to take, well, for a building permit, at this point in time, you should plan for it to take in their slow period of summer anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks to get a building permit. And 4 weeks is the best possible outcome. So you should plan for closer to 8 weeks. Yes. And because we'll go into more of like this process later, but you're always going to get comments back from the reviewers who are reviewing your request for the permit. Mm-hmm. And these comments are things that you just can't predict that they're going to want. You're going to guess, and you're going to put as much as you can in your plans and your permit application because you don't want to get any comments back, because it then sends you back into the queue, right? And then you have to go back through the queue of waiting for permits again. It's not like they immediately just stamp it off and say, great job adding that, you're ready. You go back into the queue of waiting. So long story long, the timeline is there.
Yeah.
And that's just the timeline from when you submit the permit. So in our process, and probably a lot of people's processes, other remodelers in general, we start working on permits from the beginning. We start conversations with homeowners and clients from the beginning because when we do need to pull permits, we need to be preparing and collecting that paperwork and making sure you have everything initially so that we can submit for permits and not let it slow our process down, because once we submit that, I was just talking about 2 months of waiting, right? So overall it's going to take at least 3 to 4 months of putting it all together and waiting.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. We've dealt with people, homeowners that have decided to pull permits after the fact. It can be done, but that is a big ol' just stick in the mud part of the process, because you now, like you're saying, is you have to stop what you're doing. You have to get all these like documents together that you might not necessarily need otherwise, which is going to take time. You have to outsource all of that. Then you have to submit. And so, yeah, it's possible that you've just put your whole project on hold. And that just, for us personally, like for our team and for our processes, we now have to pull that project management team off of your project and put them on another one. And that's just causes additional costs, right? So it is really imperative, when you were saying, really think about it and ask questions of like, what's the pros and cons ahead of time. And if you don't know, just think on it until you know. It's okay, right? Like think about it and decide, but definitely do it at the beginning, because it's already going to add time to your project. You don't want to add more time halfway through. And I think for people that don't understand the difference, I mean, I guess for cost wise, what would you say would be like a roundabout cost roughly if you were to pull permits? Like, what does that add?
So I mean, when working with us, it adds at least 4 to 5 thousand, and that includes permit fees. It includes um, our time for putting together all the permit information, reviewing documents, and really it includes, because permits take almost a month extra on any project because of the inspection process. It includes that time of your project being on our radar for an extra month of construction alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we always hope it's going to be more like 2 to 3 weeks. But I mean, Michelle and I have seen it where inspectors haven't come out, you make a request and they haven't come out for 3 to 4 days or a week, right? Sometimes, in best case scenario, you'll request an inspection and they'll come out the next day, but that doesn't always happen. So um, it definitely adds cost um, to your project.
Yeah, it does. But again, it's like, what's the cost worth? And like, what's that peace of mind you're getting when you pull permits? And there's obviously penalty if you were to get caught by the city not having
Mhm.
permits. So that can look different depending on the scope of work that we're doing. But if a city inspector finds we're doing work unpermitted, they'll shut down the project and make you go through that whole process. They'll issue you a fine, and so you're kind of just at square one again. Um, so it's not great. But I will say, so permits are required really if you're just doing updating. Like, let's say you're just like putting in new plumbing fixtures where your old plumbing fixtures were, you don't need a permit for that. But if you are moving plumbing from, let's say, one wall to another, or even if you're shifting it, then you do need a permit for anything you're moving with electrical, plumbing, or especially like a load bearing wall. If you have something that you're opening up a space and it is load bearing, then you do need to submit for permits for that. And really, it's just ensuring that the city is making sure that whoever's doing the work doesn't make your house fall down.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, they're responsible for making sure, the city's safe and homes are safe. And the positive is, it also, when we're talking about these considerations, the possible, hello, pregnancy brain. The positive piece of this is that the city is taking on liability, right? By coming in your home and inspecting these things, they are taking on some of that liability. And that peace of mind for you can be very relieving of like, oh, this inspector did come. They double checked everything, right? So even if you do hire, a remodeling firm like ours where we're going to do quality work, you still have a not, I mean, yeah, a third set of eyes. You have the subcontractors, you have the our construction managers and project managers, and then you have inspectors. So it's a third set of eyes that can give you peace of mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's worth it to you. I mean, it's a lot for a homeowner to do that process on your own. So you definitely want your GC doing it. And we'll talk about permit expediters here in a minute, but it's even more beneficial to have them do it because it's a lengthy process, and you want to try to speed it up as much as you can.
Yeah. And we actually just had a client the other day decide um, they were, going back and forth on what exactly they wanted to do, but they made their decision of their scope of work and decided to pull permits. And I think they were so relieved with that process of doing it early on, right? And working their way through the documents. Because if you think about it, not everybody has a survey of their home, not everybody has the trees documented on the survey of their home. And then by the time you submit all the paperwork and stuff, it's a task on top of everybody's already busy lives.
Yeah.
But permitting is required by the city. So working with a remodeler that knows the ins and outs, and we'll get into that here in a second. But yeah, so there are, we might as well dive into it. There are two types of departments when it comes to permits. There's commercial and then there's residential.
Mm-hmm.
And residential, we pull both types of permits because condos, when we work in condos, even though it's someone's home, it's their residence, it's considered a commercial permit
Yeah.
and has different codes. So we pull both commercial and residential permits. And when you're working in, I mean, even like a townhouse subdivision, a lot of those are commercial properties. So those codes and restrictions, such as a fire code or a sprinkler code or things like that, that normally wouldn't apply to a residential, it's a residence, but it's commercial. So those two
Yeah.
types of permits do
Right.
exist.
Yeah, that's important to know. I mean, and you can pull express permits, and the express is. I feel like some people argue, is it even faster than a normal building permit? Because I think some could say that it's the same timing, and they do cost a little bit more, I think. But you can. That's like if you're just doing kind of simple upgrades, right? That's not like a full-fledged remodel.
Exactly. The express permits is if you're, yeah, like swapping out the plumbing fixtures, if you're swapping out electrical fixtures, things like that, that are a little bit more in depth. And I mean, on top of that, you can also just pull an express and an electrical permit or an express and a plumbing permit. Sometimes we can just pull trade permits depending on what we're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the express permits are supposed to be with something that you can get turned around within the same week. So, and you really don't need plans for them. You
You
can
just need
even
a
like
scope of work.
sketch something up. Really, it's supposed to be really simple, but they still require the same amount of inspections. It's not like the express permit may be easier to get, but that you still have to go through all the same inspections. So
Right.
as far as like cost and timeline, that doesn't change a whole lot on construction.
Yeah, true. Yes. And yeah, I think if obviously whoever you're working with, your GC is going to explain the difference of those two and like what you need specifically. So don't feel like you need to understand the differences between the two, but just to show that there are different types where you live will vary on what permits pulled.
Yeah, and then, and then when you dive into like how to apply for permits, we've had homeowners, Michelle, we've had a handful of homeowners pull their own permits.
Which I find interesting because maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like back in the day, it was only your GC or your builder that could pull them. I mean, technically, a homeowner can pull it, but you have to tie them to a builder or a GC that's registered in their system, right? So I guess you can. In my opinion, it slows things down because there's a lot that you have to do in the portal. And so if the chain of command is like, oh, we need to do this, but I don't have access to the permit because it's in the homeowner's name and they haven't assigned it yet to us, then they have to go do it, and then we have to wait on the homeowner to do it. And so it's not to say that you can't, but I think it could slow it down.
Yeah, I remember it being slower and clunkier because there was education needed on our part to educate them on how to do it. And then like what was next, right? They'd be like, "Hey, is this normal? They said this." Or, "Hey, is this a part of this?" They said, right? So we were almost like in a consultant advising role, even though that service wasn't part of our package. So I really would advise letting the experts pull the permits, right? I wouldn't even, don't even dive into it, especially because when you get comment reports back, you're thinking, I don't know what IRC codes are, or I don't know what they're
Mhm.
talking about with, these HVAC things or electrical things. Just let the general contractor handle it.
Yeah,
Um, because homeowners then have to get other parties involved, and it's confusing.
right. I think it's a little bit of a bottleneck, in my opinion. But yeah, I guess to each their own.
Yeah.
So, all right, what are the documents then you need to pull a permit?
Yep. So you need the homeowner authorization letter, which allows us slash any expediters that we use to pull permits on your behalf, because technically we're pulling permits like on your home, right? You need a survey. You may need a tree survey. Noted. You may need, if you're doing anything to the exterior, you may need exterior photos. And depending on the scope, you'll need some sort of architectural plans. Again, depending on the scope, if it's more of a cosmetic bathroom upgrade, you won't need elaborate plans, but you need plans. And then you need a structural letter if you're removing anything load bearing or non load bearing framing wise, or if you're changing window sizes, anything that affects like the structure, interior, exterior of the home.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I forgot that you needed an engineer letter. If it's not load bearing, you still need an engineer to sign off that that wall can be removed. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, they changed it a few years ago. And I remember we were all in awe that every homeowner has to pay a structural engineer to come out and confirm that it's non-load bearing because, the city didn't want that liability.
Yeah, that's the good old city of Austin.
Yep. Yeah, they didn't want that on them. They're like, you take that. Thank you. Which, like, I mean, to some degree I get, because these inspectors didn't go to school to be structural engineers, so they're like,
Yeah, they're like,
they're like, I don't want that weight of the home on me.
yeah,
Um so it makes sense. But for small little things, you would think there'd be, I don't know. You would think there'd be clear, like for these little things that are clearly non-structural, they don't need a structural engineer, but no, it's just, I mean, in this way, they're black and white.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. There's no second guessing. I mean, obviously that's a big deal, the structure of your home. So nobody wants to like assume on it.
Nope, nope. And honestly, Michelle and I mean, we took this approach from day one because we weren't expert framers. So we just always had a structural engineer look at it, even if they weren't on site. We took pictures and videos
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't necessarily want to just trust a framer that was saying like, oh yeah, that's fine, that's fine. And I'm
Yeah,
like, is it fine?
yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I guess we acted in the same way that the city's acting.
Yeah, because we were nervous. We were like, that's nice that you have 20 years of experience, but like, did you think through everything? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. True.
You know?
So maybe it's a win-win.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it really, we also don't have homeowners pull their own permits through when you use our service because you have to set up, a specific account through the city. We have our account already set up. We have it to where, we can get our permits smoothly. We can pay online. Everything is set up and managed in that capacity. And even when we pull our building permits, we have to pull mechanical, plumbing, and electrical on top of the building permit. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
all inclusive. And Michelle and I have also learned that if you don't pull those initially, that it causes the whole project to get delayed because the city will then like pause everything and it takes a week or two to get a mechanical permit added on. That was the one when codes changed. Michelle and I had to be like, oh, okay. So now we need mechanical permits for like all bathrooms or
Mm-hmm.
kitchens anytime you're doing any venting work.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you need to pull those correct permits correctly. Because also, if you put a mechanical permit on a building permit and you don't need it, it will also slow you down. So,
Yeah.
like, you need to know whether or not you need it.
Yeah. And that's just like proof. Don't pull your own permits.
Right.
Basically what we're saying is just have us do it.
Yeah. Like in layman's terms, I don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, so we also are talking about permit expediters, and I think I've used permit expeditors. We still do it all the time. I think it's nice because they have a little bit more insight as to like things that the city might call out ahead of time because they could be working on previous projects and they might say, oh, I just got called out for this. Let's make sure we have this on the plans, right? And so it might be something we don't even think about. So they can call that out. And then if during the submission phase and we get it back and they say, we want you to adjust XYZ, that permit expediter knows how to do it really quickly and knows the source to get that information. Not to say we don't either, but it might be a first time thing that they've called out that we haven't dealt with before. And so then we just have to kind of do our due diligence to learn about it, which is fine. But again, it takes more time. So the cost of a permit expediter, in my opinion, is worth it. It depends on the project if you're doing something larger versus smaller. But I think that it also it just speeds up the process. They just have more knowledge than we do because that's what they do full time all day, every day.
Yeah. I mean, they're an expert. They know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice that they can review everything all together and point out, like, oh, you really need to note this on your plans. Or, oh, if you're doing this with your scope of work, the city has been wanting to see this more often.
Yeah,
They know what they're doing. But
totally.
Michelle and I have also been through our permit expediters that don't know what they're doing and that are really slow.
Yeah,
So, use a permit expediter that truly does know the city process. They understand construction and they are quick to reply because a lot of
yes.
permit expediters weren't the best communicators that we've worked with.
Right. It's like if you're going to be expediting this process, your communication needs to be expedited.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
You need a training on communication expedition.
101.
I
Yeah.
don't think that's a word, but expediting.
On the expedition process. Yeah.
Yes, the expedition process. Oh, we sound so knowledgeable.
Yeah, totally. We know what we're doing. Okay. So now you've pulled permits. You've gotten them approved. We're ready to begin demo. What is that experience going to be like for you? So there's a few things within that. When hiring us, you obviously have a project manager, you have a project management team. We try to meet inspectors at the property every time they're being called out to the property. That is not always the case because they'll show up sometimes unannounced. They won't give us a day and time that they're stopping by, even though we ask. And sometimes they'll just show up. So, but the goal is to always meet them because if they call out anything, we want to make sure we understand what he's or she is wanting in that area. And so then we can adjust it really quickly. And of course, if they have questions about the work, we can be there to answer it. So and I don't remember back in the day where if the home was occupied, the homeowner couldn't be there. I don't know if that's still a thing.
I don't think it's a thing, but I think the inspectors like to know if they'll be there.
Yeah.
And something about like them doing an extra notification, like they almost wait for the project manager or construction manager to be there if it's occupied.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I never knew. That was always tricky. And then if it was vacant, they wanted you there. I don't know. Sometimes they want you there, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, it's confusing. It's almost like based on the inspector, you know?
So that's a really good point because based on where you're located in the city, you will have a different inspector that is like kind of designated to your zone. And okay, with that being said, we obviously don't pick our inspectors, but you can get a really phenomenal inspector who communicates, he answers the phone, he answers your questions, like just great to work with. And then you could get other inspectors that are the complete opposite of that. And you just have to figure out what they want. They like refuse to answer their phone. I don't even know how they have it dropped, but that's how they operate. And it's tough because that can also slow us down a little bit. If their notes are really vague and we have to get clarity, then we have to like call the city and call his manager and get clarity of what he wants versus picking up the phone and calling the inspector straight up. So the when you get a good one that your project keeps kind of moving along and flowing, I will say during this process too, though, you open up your home for inspection. So not just where we're working, you basically are saying, because I'm allowing an inspector in my home, he can walk around and tell me other things that are not up to code. And it's not because we asked, it's because they just can.
Yeah. And Michelle and I have been through this so many times, the different stories of, inspectors walking through the home. And even though we're working in this space, they see something in this other space, which now the homeowner is required to bring up to code for them to pass us at final inspection. So scope creep can happen when you're permitting. And it's just an expectation we like to set with homeowners, like we do as much of it as we can as far as due diligence goes early on. That's why we have our measurements and layout on site. We have our CAD on site. We have our vendor on site, and we do things where we're bringing our vendors to fully review everything because we're looking in the eyes of an inspector as much as we can. But the code book is open to interpretation by inspectors. There's a lot of things that are gray areas. So even if we memorize the whole code book, which like God bless America. I don't know anybody that knows the entire code book. Maybe the inspectors do.
Yeah.
But, for us to, one, memorize all that, but two, try and guess how they interpret the code book. I mean, there's so many interpretations to it.
Yeah, there are. And that's also what's tough. So an inspector can say one thing about your work, another inspector can say another. And to be honest, it's just I mean, you could, of course, challenge it. We have challenged it before. But at the end of the day, the inspector is going to see what he wants to see in order to pass it. So we always have a running joke. It's like, you always want to wine and dine the inspector. So we never want to make him upset. We always want to answer his calls. We want to just be super nice and friendly because they can dictate how your project's going to go. And so we're always like jumping head over heels to just like impress them and be nice to them and accommodating. So
yeah, whatever you say, whatever you want to do.
yeah.
But of course we can't wine and dine them because you can't bribe city
Yeah, too bad you can't.
city employees. I know. Michelle and I have wanted to over the years, but obviously we don't. We've thought about it because and honestly, I didn't even realize that it was a form of bribery until we were like, oh, here, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Here's a little gift or here's this. And they're like, oh, I can't take that.
Yeah, I know. It's a gift.
Right. And I'm like, well, I'm not bribing you. The project's done or, whatever. But I didn't realize that was even a thing.
No, me neither.
So can't do that. So now we just have to hit them with our smile.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think to understand what the process is like as you're going through it is, so there's multiple rounds of inspections that you go through, and I'd say definitely the first half of those take the longest because that's when your house is open up fully down to the studs. They're noticing some additional things they want fixed. That process just can take a while because we're adjusting as the inspector goes along. And then once you're halfway through, what is it, drywall? Then it's really fast. Like then you're starting to see everything come together. You've got cabinets going in, appliances, floors. Like that's where you're really trucking along. And then you just have a final inspection at the end. So
yeah. And honestly, I think the hardest ones to get through are the rough-in of like plumbing, mechanical, electrical, and then the final. To me, I think those are the two hardest because some inspectors don't tell you initially what they're going to fail you on at final, even though they know from the very beginning. So,
yeah,
right, there could be several things that they're like, oh yeah, well I saw that early on, but it doesn't come up for me to fail you until the final. And I'm like, okay, but you could have told me anywhere in this process, right? And then the rough-in is hard just because, again, like they want to see things done in a particular way. And it's not to say that the plumbers, electricians, or HVAC specialists don't know what they're doing. But sometimes genuinely they should have done things correctly. But other times it's like a matter of preference. So you sometimes fail them.
Yeah, or it's code changes. Like code changes for electrical every 2 years. So if an electrician is doing something, I had an inspection recently, and the electrician was like, "That's so weird. He called that out. That's never been a code requirement before." And so he had to go back and fix it. And so that must have been maybe one of the code updates that the electrician didn't get. And I will point out, homeowners have said this a lot, and I think it's a good point to address because we understand that you're paying us to like go through that process and understand that process, and you want to make sure your money is being spent wisely in that regard. But I've heard homeowners say, well, shouldn't you know that ahead of time? Like, why are we even failing? Shouldn't the GC understand and catch it beforehand? And I will say, no matter who you work with, anyone, any GC, there is no way to know the full code. We have learned a lot over the years of what previous codes are and how we can adjust and fix as we go. But like we just said, code is constantly updating. So something that we might think is code from 2 years ago may no longer be something. So it's really impossible for a GC to know the full code. All we're here is to guide you to get the resources needed to answer the questions, to ask the questions, to get the process moving along, right? So we don't ever claim to know all the answers.
No. There's no way to memorize that whole code book.
Yeah, it's part of the process when you pull the permit. So I think in the end, it's worth it, obviously, but just know that that's what it does entail throughout. And it's just going to happen no matter what. Like, you are going to get a field inspection. That is 100% part of the process. We have GCs that have been working in Austin for 50 years and they still fail inspections. Like that's just part of it.
Yeah. And it really is so many variables because remodeling is so unique and we're not just building the same home over and over again.
Right.
That there's so many variables of how previous work was done and how it's also tied into our work too. Yeah. And I challenge you to go try and read the whole code book, and then you tell me how fast you get through that, because that is a tough read. And it's not, and again, it's a lot of gray area. So it's like, if this happens, then if this is applicable, then this is over here, then you would apply this. And so you can't memorize things like that, right? Because you have to look them up per situation and know, okay, well, that's not applicable. So I'm going to move to B, and B is not applicable. Oh, but C is.
Yeah.
And so it's just, yeah, it's codes and inspections. They are something that after doing this for 11 years, we are an expert in for sure. But it's impossible to know everything about it. But we will know more than the average Joe.
Yeah, I bet we know more than you. And that's good.
That is good. Okay, anything else with permits that we need to dive into?
I think we hit the high notes. Obviously, there's probably a lot of questions you may have around permits. So we are here to answer those. We're here to be a resource. We're here to introduce you to whoever we need to get your projects moving along. And even if you just need to talk about, should I pull a permit? I'm thinking about it. I don't know. I can't decide. We can help you with that decision. So there's a lot to it. And that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah. That's all for today.
Till next time.
Thank you all for listening. And Michelle and I will be back next time with more juicy information.
Adios. Now that you are hooked to the podcast, you are probably thinking, how can I learn more? Well, sign up for our monthly newsletter to see our newest remodels and the best tips for a stress-free home renovation.
With a few easy clicks, you will get to go even more in depth with us as we go behind the scenes with life, projects, and our team. Go to simplyhome.co or the show notes to sign up. See you next time. Bye, y'all.